just do the introductions and then I'll start with a few questions and then we'll get you involved and hear yours. So, I forgot to introduce myself to start with. My name's Kurt and I'm from Perth. Next to me we've got Travis, who's the director and producer of Folllowing Australia. After that we've got B from All About Balance. Then we've got Pat from the Lifelong Shuffle. We've got Dave from Strong Money Australia. And we've got Serena from the Joyful Fruit Oyster. Yeah. So, for those of you who haven't seen the movie before, which is everyone but Travis, what did you think?
You've got the microphone.
Yeah, that's nice to start. No, I think it was great. I think it really sort of captured the whole point of the movement and how we're all sort of struggling for time. And I think there is this sort of immediate instinct of people to think it's about money, and really it isn't about money. And I think everyone in this room really agrees with that. No one here is really interested in the money, and I'm just really happy that you captured that ideal that we're all sort of striving for here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Since I've always also got the microphone, I thought it was a really, really powerful movie. So I think there's a lot of lessons in there. I did feel so sorry for the wife, Taylor, though. I really did. She was obviously really struggling, and I guess as someone who writes about how frugal lifestyle doesn't have to be one of deprivation and how it can be one of joy, I really felt for her that, you know, they're in the cold and the snow, and it doesn't have to be that terrible. And I think, you know, they've made some sort of choices early on that it had been so late for them, I think, in a way, to realise that their lifestyle, their debt lifestyle was off the rails, and so they wanted to do something drastic to bring it back. But I did feel for them. I felt like I almost wanted to give her a warm hug and say, look, it's going to be okay.
I thought she was hilarious, actually. I think you did an excellent job of capturing the emotional side of the FIRE movement and the feelings along the way that many couples or singles go through on the journey. Because I don't think that's, I mean, people go through it, but maybe it's not actually out there and covered as much. So I think you did a really good job with the emotional aspect of it. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah. The taboo, you know, around money is so significant. So that was the primary thing that we wanted to capture. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it would have been the same if we didn't see that raw emotion as they went through it. And then when you see her come out on the other side and say it was 100% worth it, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to see a movie about math.
Because that's the thing, it's not really about the numbers, right? It's about your life. So you can put some spreadsheets up there and do some calculations, but it's not gonna, it doesn't have that power behind it, and it doesn't have that meaning behind it, as in getting your free time back and focusing on your life and your happiness.
The spreadsheets are cool too, right?
Oh yeah. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, yes.
I got a question for the Perla crew and then just a comment that I'd like to hear a response to. The question is to the Perla crew, when are we going to open the Australia fire camp and where is it going to be? And then just my comment as well, when they went to Hawaii and their savings rate dropped down to 37%, I think it was, and then their projected retirement time jumped up to like 22 years or whatever it was. I got quite anxious about that. And I wonder if you get quite anxious about caring about, you know, the small things all the time, and if, I don't know, maybe some people find it's not necessarily worth it to try that hard all the time. Just a comment.
Yeah, that's a great, well, first of all, that's a great comment. Getting back to your first question, we'll have to work through this group to see when the camp will be, I think.
I like that he said it was Pearl. Was George organising it?
We're trying to shift it across here. What are your thoughts on
Well, I think the Moustachians Australia Facebook group very recently posted the idea of starting the Camp Moustache in Australia. Must have been a week ago or something.
Yeah.
So, are you a part of that group or?
Yeah.
Get on there, because I think they're really keen to get it going, and if we can get enough support, then definitely a reality in Australia.
It's October next year in Lennox Head.
Lennox.
There you go.
I think your second question was roughly about having some sort of a hit to your financial situation that would delay your time to fire, is that right?
More about focusing on the little things all the time.
Yeah, it can be hard to balance. I mean, some people can get really anal about a couple of dollars here and there, but if you really focus, you've got to sort of kind of stand back a bit and focus on the big picture. And if you really have your main categories of spending sorted out like they have with the housing, the cars, the food, maybe the holidays as well, if you have that stuff sorted out, then you can kind of let the little stuff slide, but obviously not all the time, because that stuff can add up too. But it is a mental game sometimes, balancing the little things.
Can I quickly respond to that? You're probably right. It's probably like 80% of your costs come from just 20% of the things. So, yeah, that's a really good point.
I'll just tell this one story of Brandon, the mad scientist. He during his journey pushed himself so far that he and his wife moved to like a sort of cabin in the woods in Vermont, and he decided just to spend absolutely no money at all, like in order to get to FI as soon as he possibly could. But he actually came into a depression from doing that, and he talks about that quite openly, that he pushed himself so far that his life became miserable. You know, he wouldn't even go out for a beer with friends, nothing. And he had to kind of like find his calibration to where it was worth it, you know? And there's that thing, the latte factor, right? I don't know if you've heard that over here, but it's a US thing. Like, you know, there was this time when everybody said, well, if you just stop buying lattes or flat whites, I guess is what you guys would have. Like, just don't do flat whites, you know, and like invest the rest, you know, invest your flat white. Then, you know, everything will be fine. But actually, they found in studies that doing that kind of deprivation work actually is less motivating than, you know, allowing yourself to find that balance.
Buy a coffee machine.
If I may, and I know Miss B from Miss Balance is probably going to speak to this because I know she's exactly on trend, but my lovely husband Neil has been saying to me, our sanity allowance. So every month, every fortnight, both of us put $100 each on our own gold card, our own Qantas cash card, which is like a debit card. And we can spend that however we want. And so if I want to go out to a coffee, I don't drink coffee, but if I want to go out to chai latte and another friend wants to have coffee and I want to pay for them to have coffee, I want to go out for something with my girlfriends, I want to do something, I can do it, no problem whatsoever. And anything left over, I pay them for whatever I want. And I'm a big op shopper, love clothes, love op shopping, so that's my other kind of treat. And it is really important, I think, to have that balance. So we've just come back, before I came down with this cold, from a skiing trip with my 75-year-old dad and my husband Neil. And while we were there, we went to a fairly expensive Italian restaurant out at Jindabyne, and we took out to dinner my 77-year-old former ski instructor. And it was a lovely meal. I mean, it was just a beautiful evening, fantastic conversation, very inspiring. These two men in their 70s who are still active and fit for skiing. And we came home and my husband Neil, who's wiser than me, said, well, sometimes you have to live a little. And I said, yes, but you see, because I'm frugal, that's why I can afford to do that, because if we weren't, we wouldn't be able to have these moments. So yeah, indeed, it is, I think, I've changed my attitude a lot. In my first marriage, we spent about 5 years where we were extremely frugal for various reasons. We'd amassed 10 investment properties, or 10 properties in total, but our cash flow situation was terrible and we never went out and we never did anything. And I really came away from that experience going, well, kind of what's the point? Like, what's the point of this numbers game if you're just, you know, stressed all the time and working long hours and not being able to have those moments that are really important. I mean, I'm still pretty frugal, don't get me wrong, we live on about half of our incomes, but, you know, it definitely has brought a little bit more balance to that perspective.
I suppose if you're on the journey and you're spending 40, 50 hours, maybe 60 hours a week working, you're spending the rest of your free time trying to figure out new ways to save, there's not much time for enjoying your life. You're going to do that for 10 years, so you can find ways to save, but you do have to enjoy your spare time as well, because it is really precious while you are still working. And just on the restaurant thing, I think if you do go out for an expensive meal at a restaurant, that's fine, but like when you do it all the time, it becomes really meaningless. It wears off, you know, the fat just kind of wears off. So if you do limit it to special occasions, you do really enjoy those things more.
Yeah, I agree with that notion. And also just about finding balance. Once you kind of realise what it is you really want to spend your money on, one or two things that you'll really value and enjoy, you kind of get into a groove. And I just did my spendings report for the last year compared to this year, and I've spent the same amount within $10 without even trying. So I don't budget. I just kind of have my groove. I found it. I track what I spend, and I can still save more than half my income.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much, really improving. I just wanted to ask about, you have great cultural diversity and gender diversity in the film. And in Australia, you know, I think we're still finding our feet with that. Do you have any advice for, you know, the movement in Australia?
About diversity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm great we've got two women on stage tonight, and, you know, thanks.
Yeah, well, you know, the women thing is really difficult in our community. I mean, there are a lot of women in the community. In truth, we worked really hard to try to put diversity into the film. Kirsten and Julian, the African-American couple that you saw, they're just absolutely wonderful. You know, this is a big question. I mean, you know, in the United States, one of the big problems, there's two problems with the African-American community specifically, which is, one is education. Inside the community itself, they don't talk about what we're talking about. Part of that is because there is no generational wealth due to, you know, the history of the world. And Julian and Kirsten are just really like out there trying to change that within their community, you know. So I think it's really, you know, it has to be people that can talk on the same level, you know. Like, it's not fun for a bunch of white people to go around talking to African Americans and telling them like how they should figure this all out. You know what I mean? Like, it has to start from within, I think. But the fact of the matter is that anybody with disposable income has the capacity to save more money and create freedom for themselves. So that's the message that we're trying to send to all communities.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, really, at the heart of it, what was the motivation for you putting the film together? Because it's quite a unique theme, quite a unique story to tell.
Yes. So my motivation was initially personal. I have my own story of FI, which is that I was financially illiterate until I was about 40 years old. I was $40,000 in student loan debt at 9% fixed interest for life. I had at that point paid about $40,000 in interest, and with no money off the principal whatsoever. I also had credit card debt. I was a starving artist, and I always thought that I was going to win the lottery or hit the big time in Hollywood, and my life would change. That didn't happen, but then my dad died, and he left me $75,000. He was a school teacher, so he didn't have a lot of money besides his pension, which went to my mom. And so for the first time in my life, I paid off my own debt, and I had about $20,000 in the black, and I panicked because I had no idea what to do with the money. And so I started reading a lot of books, because at that time, this was a little over 10 years ago now, there weren't really a lot of blogs out. I read things like The Intelligent Investor, because I thought I was intelligent, and somehow I would figure that out, but of course I had no idea what was going on in the book. because I'm not a math person. And I came across Mr. Money Mustache and Early Retirement Extreme, which is written by a guy named Jacob Lund Fisker, who retired on $300,000 total net worth, living almost like, you know, a van life person, but he had healthcare in Denmark. And I looked at that and I thought, oh wow, I'm really good at being poor. That's how I've lived my whole life. If I could just increase my savings rate, maybe I can dig myself out of this hole. And that's exactly what I started to do. And then I was lucky enough to go to the second or third Chautauqua ever with Mr. Money Mustache and the rest of the crew. And it was a week that I spent talking about money with people of like mind and who were bearing their souls about the way that they lived and their thoughts about value and what was important in life. And I was like, wow, I've really found a home here, and I wanted to make a contribution. But not being a math person and not thinking that I would start my own blog, I thought, well, what can I do to help other people be introduced to this? And I was like, I know how to make movies and how to make TV, and so I wanted to make a contribution. And it really is kind of what Christy said at the end of the film. You know, once you get to a certain point, you start thinking about how you can give back. And this is my first effort to just simply try to give back and inspire people to think about life in a different way.
You've done a fantastic job doing that.
Good follow-up question. Thanks for the documentary, by the way. I did really open up my mind. I didn't think buying an extra car would set me back 5 years. I wanted to touch on the investment. Like, they did an index fund. I know there's real estate you invest and other stuff, business. But with index fund, do you have any suggestions of what your thoughts are on how to go about finding one? Some are like, you know, yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, I'll turn some of this over to the experts on stage, but what I would just say is that the general philosophy is to invest in a broad-based index fund which invests in the entire market. But what do you guys think?
This isn't advice. You go to Google and type in Vanguard. You'll go very far. And that's it. It's very, very simple. People can kind of go to and fro about how much you should put into international versus Australian stocks, but at the end of the day, if you literally just Google Vanguard, John Bogle, Jack Bogle, whatever, and you're done. You're 90% of the way there. Yeah.
If you want to do the deep dive, actually J.L. Collins has a wonderful blog called jlcollinsnh.com, I think. He also has a book called The Simple Path to Wealth, and it's a great introduction to stock market and index fund investing in general. I don't know if there's a better one in Australia.
Were you wondering specifically how to find an index fund in Australia?
Yes, there's plenty of them.
Yeah, just Google index funds Australia. There's some by all sorts of fund managers like Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and they'll cover, say, the ASX 200 or the ASX 300, and so they'll come up with a ticker code, and you can type that code, say VAS for Vanguard, into your online stockbroking account. You can buy shares in that index fund like you can any other company, and by buying shares in that index fund, you will own the top 300 companies in Australia, and as those 300 companies rise and fall, your fund and your investment will rise and fall, and as those companies change over time, the index fund will be managed in a way that the losers will drop out and new companies will come in, and you'll say you own 300 companies right now, that's the top 300. In 50 years' time, you'll still own the top 300 companies. You don't have to think about what's going to win and what's going to lose. It's all sort of automatically done behind the scenes. Yeah, in Australia they pay about 4% dividend yield plus franking credits, which takes the dividend yield up to about 5.5%.
Twice as good as the US.
And so, just to follow up on that, you can literally look at any of the people's blogs on stage and you can see how they invest. Like, this is the most powerful thing about FIRE, is the absolute transparency. And it's really powerful to be able to go, all right, this is where real people put their money and their savings, and it's their strategy and their goals and how they're going about it. And I guess that's why I'm personally so excited, and I think everyone here is like compelled. So just check out, one of the blogs, and you can see how they do it. The tickers, the platforms they're using, everything that we're doing is online, so you can check it out.
So how do you reconcile investing if you're living a values-based life with the top 300 companies where that's buying into the consumerism?
I'm going to take on the ethical question. I don't know, this is probably a very scary thing to do. I think there is a really strong growing trend, particularly among younger investors, looking for strong ethical investments, and there's a number of green investment products that are around. When looking at those, I think it's really, and I'm not recommending any particular, I don't actually invest in any particular ones myself, although I've looked at some. It's really important as well to look not just at their performance, because there isn't a long history of their performance, but also their management fees and other things. But I think you've got a good point there, that I think people are looking now, people don't just want to invest in the tobacco companies and the coal companies and the gambling companies that are going to lead them to the top returns. I'm guessing here that you've asked that question for a reason, and there's probably a lot of people here in the audience who think similarly. You're wanting your money to make a difference for the returns, and there's certainly a lot of products out there that will deliver that for you.
I'll just say that it's very hard to become financially independent without investing, so that comes as part of the journey. But I suppose the thing is that you can use capitalism to your advantage without being a mindless consumer in the system, basically. So it can be hard to reconcile, but you can make ethical choices while still investing. And even though you're investing in those companies, you're not saying I love those companies, you're saying I'm investing in the future of Australia or in the future of the global economy, because the global economy will grow over time. And if companies are doing the wrong thing, I believe personally that they'll be found out that they are doing the wrong thing, because we live in an age where there's so much information that it's hard to keep a scandal under wraps for too long, and eventually those companies will be found to be doing the wrong thing. And they vote with their wallets, right? So I believe that companies who aren't doing something of value for society will eventually, not instantly, but eventually fall by the wayside over time. Maybe that's a little idealistic, but...
Yeah, and I think, aside from investments, which, as Serena said, you can choose ethical options, there's other ways to give back and make the world a better place as well. If you have more time, and if you're spending less money, you have other options available as well if you're interested.
Make a movie.
Great way to give back.
I'd probably just like to add that if your goal is indeed to be as ethical as possible, then avoiding what you consider to be unethical investments probably won't achieve that goal. Because at the end of the day, if all of the ethical people avoid all of the unethical companies in their investments, then only the unethical people will invest in those companies. And given that there's less demand for those companies, they'll get those companies at very good valuations, and they'll make all of this additional money and not direct it towards ethical places. I mean, this is just broader, high things. So, I mean, really the goal is just broad-based index investing, and we don't want all of the ethical people making less money than the unethical people. Because at the end of the day,
to this guy named Barney who has a great blog in London called The Escape Artist. And he and I were talking about the origins of the FIRE movement generally. And in England, like in the US, I trace it back to like Walden, and things like that. And in the UK, he was talking about the agricultural aristocracy, right? So the landowners who lived on passive income from agriculture and rent. And for better or for worse, like when you liberate people from mandatory work, their creativity and their imaginations are able to flourish in new ways. So when you look at the landed aristocracy in England, these are the people who created novels. They're the people who created great playwriting. They're the people who created policy, right? They also created things like global colonization, you know what I mean? So it just depends on the person, but the thing that's really interesting is that once you liberate the imagination, human beings do extraordinary things, also extraordinarily evil things.
Well, you do.
A bigger question. If the movie succeeds on the grand scale that we expect it will, and we actually get changing savings rates, what's the outcome on national economies?
Seeing I tend to be tackling all the difficult ones firstly, I want to say this as well. This industrial revolution phase has gone. We're talking about the agrarian revolution, where we went through that, we've gone through the industrial revolution. We're now in the fourth industrial revolution, where there's going to be unprecedented disruption to the nature of the future of work, and that is already happening. So, we're talking about how is this going to disrupt the existing work? Well, that disruption is already happening. And in order for us, I think, let's talk Australia as a country, for us to have the agility, to have the next great innovators with the next great ideas, we need people who have really good savings histories, because they need to be able to have that financial basis from which to take risks into this next great world. So I don't see this as a threat at all. In fact, if anything, I think this is what we really need to do to help prepare ourselves. Because, particularly younger people, and I'm 46, nearly 47, so I'm a different generation. But, definitely we need to have that financial resilience and financial agility to prepare ourselves for the next opportunities and challenges.
We're referring to if people spend less money, the economy will slow down, and is that what kind of line
I was trying to get a bite on that one, yeah.
I think of it a bit like dieting, as in people want to eat healthy and exercise, but how many people are actually going to do it? As much as we think this is amazing, everyone should do this, everyone is not going to do this. It's just not going to happen. It's always going to be a small but hopefully growing portion of the population, and therefore it's going to have not as big an impact on the economy as we might think.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But I will say that economies are like, they're living things. They adapt over time, and if we all make different decisions, it happens very slowly and very gradually if more and more people slowly do it. So you can imagine that the economy can adjust to that over time, I believe.
Yeah, so I'm going to hope that we're wrong, but I kind of agree with you. If we are wrong, though, and this is a question I get asked a lot, I think I'm at a stage now where we'll probably get a stabilising savings rate at a point that's higher than we are now, which will mean a short-term contraction.
Savings rates are still declining, by the way.
Yeah, you're right. But there's something fun to think about as well. Going into the economy could be a good thing. Anyway, throwing it back to the floor.
We had a couple of questions up this way.
Yeah. Cool.
My husband is keen to retire very soon. We have a fair bit of money invested in property and shares. One of my concerns is down the track if, for example,
So you're talking about backup plans, basically. Yeah. So there's a few things you can do, I guess. The first backup plan that anyone should have, whether they're working or retired, is to have a cash buffer. So that helps you if you need a new car, if something comes up, you lose your job, whatever, especially if your rent falls or your dividends fall. A cash buffer of maybe a couple of years of spending should see you through some pretty harsh times. Other than that, you can obviously spend less money if you were in retirement. And people who are in the FIRE movement tend to be very good and very flexible with their expenses. So they tend not to be closed-minded and shut off that option. So it's always good to keep that option open. Other than that, there's always the option of getting some sort of work for some period of time to see through some hiccups in the road that will, because the economy and markets and whatever is not going to be perfect forever. So having the ability to earn some extra cash can help as well. So those three things, or renting rooms out in your house or anything like, there's lots of things that you can do, but it just pays to be open-minded and have a few kind of strings on your boat if those things were to happen.
Yeah, I'd probably just like to say as well, I mean, this is the real power of frugality is in those situations where your income might fall 50%, but if you only need to live off $40,000 a year and your income falls from 40 to 20, then it's not that difficult to make another 20,000 a year. You can do it stacking shelves, you can do it being a lollipop man or woman or whatever. So if you have a $100,000 a year lifestyle and your income falls by 50%, then it's a lot harder for two people to make up a spare $50,000 a year. That's it.
How do you view super?
We have different views on super, actually.
I know Miss B and I have been talking superannuation this afternoon, so let me once again start this because I know we have some radically different views on superannuation here. My biggest regret was that I didn't contribute more to my superannuation early. I thought for many years that superannuation was all going to fall in a heap. I felt that the industry would end up being unregulated badly and that there would be mass corruption and mass fraud and it would all be just terrible. I thought that I knew how to manage my money better than some other fund, and I thought that was crazy. However, what I neglected to do is to get informed about my own superannuation fund. So I'm a Commonwealth Government employee and I have one of the best superannuation funds in Australia that's funded by the Futures Fund. I say second best, my husband has the first best, so we married last year, I married well. It's quite coincidental, I didn't know that on our first date, it should have come up a topic of conversation, I don't know. But anyway, it's all good. But what I neglected to realise was just how powerful that was, because if I had realised that, I would have been making additional contributions earlier. Now, I do now, but I didn't know because my colleagues, we just don't talk about money at work. It's like, oh, this is an important policy thing, it'll make me look good in front of my boss or the minister will like it. But we don't talk about our superannuation and how important that is. Because if we did, I would have known that after 10 years of service, I could have put in 10% extra of my superannuation and my employer would match that dollar for dollar. I know that now and I do that now. But if I had started making additional contributions much, much earlier, I would have been in such a much better place. And so I wanted to mention that now because of the in Australia now the changes now that you can only contribute a maximum of $25,000 per year, which is capped. It is really important if superannuation is going to be part of your strategy to start early because the tax advantages at the moment are huge. They are really phenomenal. You pay 15% tax when it goes in and you don't pay any tax when it comes out pretty much. It's one of the best things you can do. And then the co-contribution scheme, if you have a spouse or you yourself are a low-income earner, are great as well. So the advantages are really there. Now you might think, well, I want to be FIRE, I want to retire early, so I don't want to wait until I'm at that age where I draw out my super. But also consider a strategy where, say, for instance, you decide to retire at 30 or 40, but then you've got that gap of about 20 years, and then you can get your super. So consider also, a lifetime phase program where you've got parts, reliant on, say, Vanguard or rental income or other things, and then parts that are reliable from super, because it still is incredibly powerful.
knowing what your options are and knowing what your choice is. So my personal choice is to put, to max out my super, but then also contribute the same amount outside of super. So I will have that two-phase option where I have enough to utilise now before I hit that age where I can access my superannuation. So that's my personal choice. And my goals are to have a few years out of the workforce anyway at some time where I won't necessarily be contributing. So that's what I'm doing now, but Pat has a different view, so over to you.
Yeah, so I suppose I'd be what you'd call sort of disenfranchised with the superannuation system. I think we've all experienced multiple changes over the last few years of the super system, the changing of the rules very recently as well, with maximum contributions per year and the pension maximum you put in the pension phase account and all that sort of thing. So I sort of come at this from a very sceptical sort of nature. And I'm roughly 30 years from being able to access my super, so I just sort of look at this in a Moore's law sort of way. It's 30 years is a very long time frame, and with the government's history of changing the rules around super, I'm hesitant to contribute more than the minimum compulsory amount. Now that being said, the sort of risk-return profile changes with age, it changes with income, it changes with the tax bracket you're in, and it's sort of personal choice. I don't want to come here and deter anyone from contributing too much to super, especially if they're very close to being able to access it. But yeah, definitely have a plan to have money outside of super, especially if you're young and if you want to contribute to super. I'm going to say not to, obviously.
Pat, do you think that part of you making that choice is because you have the discipline to actually save and invest that money outside, whereas some people are happy to do the salary sacrifice because it's kind of set and forget, and then they don't have to worry about it, they can't see the money and they can't access it?
I mean, I've never really thought about that, but I think it's more a bit of confusion around what the superannuation system is for a lot of people. They think they're investing in super when super is just an account, really, and the investments are in something else. So people contribute to super, they know super's for their retirement, but then they're in conservative options, even if they've got 30-year time frames, and it's just one of those things that if they don't know too much about investing, then it's all managed for them behind the scenes.
They get informed.
Yeah, it is a personal choice, and depending on your age, you might think of it differently. I personally treat it super as a bit of a bonus for later on, or another backup plan, really. But of course, like as Serena said, you can build a portfolio of whatever, if it's properties or shares, live off that, and as you sort of maybe deplete that portfolio or sell down that portfolio, then you have super as a backup for later on, and you can live on that, and there's also the pension, of course, later. But other than that, it's extremely tax efficient. But the way I thought of it is, as tax efficient as it is, I might not be able, if I want to retire at 30, I might not be able to access it for maybe 40 years if the dates get pushed back. So just the uncertainty around it just made me not want to make it part of my plans. So it's just another backup plan for me personally.
Can you explain a bit more about your own circumstances, Dave? So how far along the road to FIRE are you?
You got me there. We were actually financially independent as of about 2 years ago. So my journey started when I was about probably 19, I'd say, at work, just in a factory job. And I looked around me and I noticed that nobody really seemed all that happy to be at work. And I kind of talked to a few guys and asked them, how long you've been here, and they've all been here a long time. And I kind of questioned, like, why do they do this? Why do we live like this? And they basically just accepted that that's what we have to do to pay the bills, to pay the mortgage, to pay the car loan. And I just remember looking around one day and just thinking, there has to be another way. This is not good. I can't can't do this forever. It has to be something else. So I started looking into how I was going to kind of escape that kind of life, because if I just copy what they do, I'm just going to end up with the same result as they got. So I think I started Googling stuff and come up with building wealth through either growing a business or investing in property and shares. So we ended up investing in quite a decent sized property portfolio because we're in Australia, so that's kind of our religion here. So that's what we did, and the share market seemed kind of unreliable because it goes up and down. But anyway, we did that for quite a few years, and then later down the journey we started investing in shares as well, because I think we maxed out our borrowing capacity. We couldn't buy any more properties, so we thought, well, we still have savings every month, what are we going to do with it? So that's when shares sort of came onto the radar. I started looking into it, and the only thing that really made sense to me was investing for dividends, because the share prices seemed a bit crazy to me. So investing for dividends which grow over time, and that can be your income stream to live on. So after we started doing that for a year or so, we started getting these dividend payments coming in. A light bulb kind of went off on my head that if we had all our savings in shares rather than property, we could actually retire pretty much straight away, because even though we had put all our savings into property and there was equity in there because they'd grown a bit in value, the cash flow was just terrible. Like, there's so many bills and the yields are low, and it's just, yeah, there's mortgages and the cash flow is crap. So
maintenance too.
Yeah, maintenance, strata fees, like it never ends, you know. So that was kind of the light bulb moment. So we actually decided, well, do we want to keep these properties, or do we want to actually, you know, if we decide to sell and buy shares instead, then we can actually quit our jobs and actually be financially independent. So we decided to bite the bullet and start selling down our properties. So we've sold a couple so far. We quit our jobs. We live on, use some of the money to live on, some to kind of fund the other properties that we still have, and the rest to keep building our share portfolio so that the dividend income keeps growing. And so we're a few years into that journey so far. So after about 10 years, the ultimate plan is that we'll have no properties left, and we'll just have a big share portfolio and the income pays for all of our expenses.
Not much in super.
No, super's like six figures, but it's just a backup plan for later, so it's not.
Yeah, so I think that's ages gives a lot of context to where people put money in, as well as strategy and what people are comfortable with. You know, so thanks for sharing. Yeah.
The couple of the movies seem to be achieving packing up their lives and moving to the other part of the country, leaving their family, etc. Why do you put someone a couple who took it to that nth degree and not someone who sort of like looked at, you know, changing into an issue?
Well, it's just better storytelling.
This is more a question on blogging than specifically FI, but can I ask how you kind of manage your time in terms of writing posts and replying to emails and comments, and, you know, the risk of trolling and things like that?
It's easy for Dave because he's retired.
I can be pretty lazy with my time and still get enough done. So I actually carve out, I'm probably the slowest blogger in the world, but I actually carve out like 2 days to do a blog post because it takes me that long. Other than that, yeah, I do a weekly post, but it takes me a couple of days to write. Fluffing around with my notes and trying to make it sound, because something makes sense in your head, but you write it down and it doesn't look right, so you have to keep adjusting it. But other than that, I haven't had too many trolls, thankfully, so that's been good.
I started my blog about 2.5 years ago, and I started with one post a week, then one post a fortnight, then once a month. Yeah, I'm down to once a quarter, so you know, that's how my blogging journey is going. It is really just the time thing, working full time. I have a second job as well. You know, priorities and things like that. I think for me, it was more exciting to find people in the community to talk to. So now I talk to people a lot more actually off the blog. But it was about finding like-minded people, setting myself up, knowing what I wanted to do, and now I'm happy to cut back and just sort of let it go on cruise mode. That's my personal thoughts on it.
I mean, I'd just like to say I was extremely lucky about a year and a half ago when I got an article in the ABC. Like extremely fortunate. This guy just poked me out of the wilderness. He's like, hey, you want to write an article? And I'm like, sure. And that has just driven me since, because you get so much interaction, so many comments, so many people asking questions, and that it's really difficult to continue blogging and just have zero interaction on your blog. And that is the vast majority of blogs, like probably over 90%. But yeah, that's what gives me going, that motivates me.
Lucky last. I'm one crazy lady. I really am. I don't know how I find time for everything. And you know, my husband is looking at me. He's looking at me. Yeah, you are crazy, but I love you anyway because I know that's how he knows how I am. Because I work full time. You know, we got married last year. I've got 2 small primary school age children who are with me 9 nights a fortnight. It's not just the blog for me. It's also a range of other things I write for. I'm just in the process of launching a podcast with a friend. And yes, the interaction with the blog read is really important, and that's not just the comments on the blog, it's actually mainly through the Facebook group, the Facebook page, the Instagram, the whole range of things. It's a constant process, and the book as well. So in the midst of all of that last year, I found time to write a book. But I think when you have a passion for something, and it's something that's really important for you, you find time. I don't know how I find time. I really don't. I don't have a schedule. I mean, it's like I'm supposed to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning or 6:30 in the morning and write. And I think in the last 2 years I've managed to sleep through the alarm nearly every day. I don't know how I do it. Still at night, you know, when I'm meant to be in bed, I'm still writing and I'm still doing stuff. But you know, you just find that time, and because it's important to you, and you somehow do that. And so it does mean some sacrifices. I think sometimes. Not going out to expensive dinners in Jindabyne on skiing holidays all the time, but you just find time for it.
You all have fantastic insights, and I was hoping that we could somehow get a list of all your blogs or links to all of your blogs and your resources and make that available to everyone in the room, whether it's through an email or putting it on the board or something.
Get back to everyone with that.
Where do you think this emerging gig economy affects one's path to financial independence?
I think that it has so many opportunities for people, but also you've got to know what you're getting yourself into. So the companies that have been in trouble for taking advantage of employees, for underpaying and things like that, I don't think those things are good by any means. But for the ones that give people flexibility to work around their families or other opportunities to work second jobs or third jobs, things like that, I think it's the way forward. People don't necessarily want to work just 9 to 5, and the fact that there are other options, you know, online work and other things like that, I think it's a good opportunity for people as long as it's done in the right way.
I have lots of views on this topic as well, so I will try not to speak too much. It's both an incredible disruption and an incredible opportunity. For me personally, I have 2 Airbnbs that I run, one in my home from time to time and then another separate one, and certainly the returns are much larger. The opportunity to work flexibly and remotely, to do other things like freelance writing is definitely amazing. What is interesting though is that what's happened to the labour figures in Australia and also to the average wage. So in the last 10 years, our wage just hasn't really gone up, and people haven't been able to work out why this is sort of happening, because it seems that employment's sort of edging up, but yet our average wage is going up. And there's been a lot of discourse about suggesting that this is largely as a result of the gig economy, so that particularly younger graduates are no longer necessarily coming out of university and going straight into this, you know, well-paid full-time job. It's more likely to be more temporary or transient contract work or gig economy work, which is harder then for younger people to do things like get home loans, because it's harder to prove a stable and On the other hand, though, it offers unprecedented flexibility, and I know Kirsty shared she's got, and she's talked about this, about how you could, say, have a job, say, from New York, but you can live somewhere else, which is much cheaper. So this remote working, we saw this a little bit in the documentary, so that offers unprecedented opportunities for those on the FIRE movement to, say, have a Sydney job but not necessarily live in Sydney where it's expensive, you could live somewhere else. So those are the sorts of opportunities it offers you. But then some of the other problems too is that some of the early research into the gig economy points to it to being gendered. And if you think about it, there's been some really quite powerful protections in place to prevent discrimination against women and discrimination against age and discrimination against a lot of things. And when you're choosing on the gig economy, you're only choosing, a worker for a particular task. Those little things are all blown out the window. So there's some things that are quite significant that are going to affect people as a community. Like I said, I had lots of views on this topic.
The only other thing I would add is that it can be seen as a great opportunity for transitioning into a FIRE lifestyle, whereas you might want to, say, scale down work and actually find something that you're good at or that you enjoy that might be part-time and flexible in nature, and that might be like really what you want to do because you'll probably still want to do some sort of work after you're financially independent, and the gig economy, it will probably continue to grow in prominence, and that type of flexibility might be just what people who are FIRE are looking for from employment post mandatory job.
This question's mainly for Dave. You obviously apply, and you sort of promote dividend shares, Australian shares, and the franking benefits from them. For people who are starting or in the wealth accumulation phase, and sort of, do you think it's better to defer those sort of quarterly CGT events if you have a higher marginal tax rate? Do you think that approach is applicable when you're at the early stage?
You mean taking a dividend approach while you're still working if you're a high income earner?
Yeah, rather than sort of just buy dividend shares in the US.
Yeah, it's tricky. I'll probably choose the asset allocation I felt most comfortable with before thinking about tax. I mean, tax is important, but asset allocation is probably more important. You've got to choose something that you're going to be comfortable with. And it kind of also depends on how long your journey is going to be, because if it's only a short journey, you can probably put up with a bit of extra tax in the short term if it's, say, less than 10 years, to have maybe a higher income stream sooner. But I don't really think there's a right answer. I think that you kind of have to decide for yourself how much, say, Aussie versus international shares you want, and just kind of go from there. So there's no real perfect answer to that one.
Question for Kurt. How is Pearl different from Rays and Backyard and Boston?
Just names a few different companies there. So anyway, at the end of the day, we're building an online broker that allows automatic investments into ASX-listed assets, as well as you to connect with other people. So you can connect with family and friends, show them how you invest, or vice versa, and you can start having a conversation around why you've chosen to invest the way you have, what your goals are. Then also we're embedding an FI calculator to be used, so you'll be able to track your progress along the way with your actual investments. We'll break that out a bit later to be a more general goals tool where you can do it for any long-term goal, but that's where we're starting to begin with. Yeah. Any follow-ups?
Well, I guess specifically in terms of fees and the amounts, I didn't really understand how it works with the direct debit investing. Is it that you have to accrue $500 before you can actually buy and track the shares, or is it the same as Rays?
Yes, so it's ASX, so it's into the market. $500 is the minimum in the ASX. We'll be doing it in NYC and NASDAQ too, where the minimums are lower, but that's later on. Yeah, so just that, and fees are going to be comparative with self-wealth for FIREside transactions. So I'm talking like $9.50 for anything up to 30k or 50k, I'm not sure exactly yet. Cool.
also a lot of talk these days that a recession has already started. What are some of the things that you do to protect yourself against that?
Don't look.
Along the same lines, I don't know when a recession's coming. No one else knows when a recession's coming, no matter how much they say on the TV or the internet. And your best strategy all the time, my best strategy, because I don't give advice, is to just continue to invest as soon as I have the money available all the time, regardless of what the professionals are saying on TV. And I'd also just like to add, J.L. Collins wrote an article in 2012 where people were predicting a recession 7 years ago, and the share market has doubled since then. And that's the danger of watching what the talking heads on TV trying to say.
Yeah, I see a lot of people in different forums say, I'm waiting, I'm just waiting for the crash. And they've been waiting, as Pat said, for years and years and years. And if you never get in, then you never get started. So you're better off, what's the saying? Time in the market, not timing the market. So I do the same as Pat, just invest on a schedule, no matter what it is, every quarter, put in my amounts, and I go from there.
The truth is no one knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. I mean, I did this the other day and Googled, because I got a lot of time on my hands. I Googled Australia recession 2018, Australia recession 2017, Australia recession 2016. I went back to like 2012 and there was articles every single year saying that the market's going to crash, there's going to be a recession, Australia's golden run is over, but it never happened. And someday it will, because these things happen, the economy goes up and down, but over the long term, everything should be just fine. And the thing that people need to remember is when you're regularly investing for a goal such as financial independence, having the market go down a lot early in your journey is the best thing that could possibly happen. It might not feel like it, it might be extremely scary and unnerving, but it is the best thing that can happen because you're going to be buying aggressively. You're going to be putting money in every month or every quarter whenever you do it, and if the prices are lower and lower and lower, you're going to be buying more shares for the same number of dollars that you're putting in. And then when the market eventually recovers, your portfolio value will expand because you own a larger amount of shares than you otherwise would if the market had just kept going up.
As someone who's, I guess, slightly different generation, I do remember the last recession we had to have, and it was scary and it wasn't particularly fun for me because I was at that stage of graduating from university and it was very, very hard to find work. I had a lot of very strong ramifications, and yes, I do think that the Reserve Bank are worried, and I think the current government, the federal government, are worried. Now that doesn't mean that we are heading into recession, but certainly the way that the interest rates keep being cut continuously is a sign that there is some worry. So now what do we do about this? Do we all panic and do we head off into the woods and go, oh, I can't handle this anymore? No, we do continue, and definitely, dollar cost averaging is a very good strategy to follow. But I think the best strategy to follow is to reduce any debt you have. Now in my case, because I have properties, I'm taking...
Travis, how did this audience find your movie to other audiences?
Well, that's up to you.
In our reaction.
Yeah, I think that, the thing that struck me was that you guys are more sincere than the UK or the US.
Elaborate, yeah.
Well, you just didn't laugh in the same spots. I think the UK and the US audiences are very cynical, and it took this audience a little longer to warm up to the comedy in the film, I think.
I thought it was funny.
Thank you. It's a comedy. But it's funny because, just anecdotally, listen, I travel a lot. I travel for work and I go around the world a lot. You guys are very, very, in very good shape here. You have so much going for you as a country. You're your social security net is extremely sound. You have free education, generally speaking. You know, you have a solvent government. You don't have Donald Trump as president. You know, there are a lot of great things going for you guys, and so it's palpable for me as an international traveler to see how well things are here.
Dave, in your life, you've sort of gone on a bit of a journey about how you invested, and you sort of seem to have convinced each other of different methodologies and flip-flopped a little bit. I don't say that in a negative way, but where have you both ended up? Because you've gone through this sort of circular thing about LICs and ETFs and so on, and both convinced each other and then convinced each other back. Almost.
No, yeah, I say that is completely true. I was always a very big ETF investor, and then Dave started talking, and I read his blog about LICs, and I thought that, look, this dividend investing thing is great, there's a solid returns as well, and that's a great, more stable income. I won't say completely stable to receive. But I think I really have sort of returned back to whole sound index investing strategy, and sort of more recently seen the benefits of international diversification. Probably took me a bit too long to see those benefits, but here I am, I'm young, I'm learning as well, and I'm happy I'm doing that, so yeah.
And that's the thing, we're all just learning, just like you guys are learning. No one knows it all. Like, we might be on a stage, but nobody knows everything. I mean, we probably know less than you think we do. But that's the thing, we're both still figuring things out, and one thing I learned that I don't think gets spoken of enough about index funds is
Positive skew.
That's right. It's called positive skew.
That's
So
not all I know is content.
there's been studies done in America over the course of a few decades that showed that out of all the stocks in the US market, a large portion of the returns are driven by a small number of stocks. Now, I don't know if the same thing is true in Australia. I don't think it's true to the same extent because we have a large amount of companies that are very, very old. So I don't think it's true to the same extent. But that concept and that, not like a rule of thumb, but that concept is still very powerful, that the index has this automatic rebalancing, and that if you miss some of those big winners, you're likely to underperform. And although the older listed investment companies that I still invest in, I'm happy to hold them because they own a large portfolio of kind of blue chip dividend paying stocks that provide pretty reliable income. If they miss some of the biggest winners, they are likely to underperform, and that's just the way it is. And that's something that I've learned in the last year or so that I don't think gets enough airtime. Index funds tends to be like about low cost and diversified and all the rest of it, but positive skews that was a big eye opener for me.
Any follow-ups?
Yeah. So have you got an endpoint, or are you still listening? Because
I'd like to
through
think.
all the blogging and stuff, there's obviously an ongoing debate. You see people's thoughts. Do you think you've reached an endpoint?
I mean, the thing is, every time I change my mind, I think I've reached an endpoint. Yeah. And then I change my mind again. So I'm reluctant to say I've reached an endpoint, but I think I've reached an endpoint. As I sort of responded to an earlier question, it's just, the only game in town now really is broad-based index fund investing with huge diversification across international markets and Australian markets.
My thing is I'll continue to buy listed investment companies, but I'll kind of add a caveat that provided that they're at a decent discount to kind of compensate for the kind of likelihood that they'll miss some high growth stocks and underperform. But other than that, I'm happy to own both because they both have their benefits in different ways, and I like them both for kind of different reasons.
Directed at everyone on the panel, what would be your one piece of advice to someone just starting on their journey to being
looking at me once again at the start. Look, you know, really it's just to do it and to make a conscious effort to live within your means and to save a certain amount. So I really was influenced very highly in my early days by The Richest Man of Babylon, which talks about saving 10% of your income. Now I know we've had different charts with different savings rates, you know, and they go up and go down, but if you're at least saving 10% and you start early, like that's going to put you in much better stead than people who are spending 110% of their income. So it's just start early, and the more you can save and invest, the better.
I'd say rather than focusing on earning more, focus on spending less, because that's often a debate. But I don't even think the debate's worth having, because if you go and earn an extra $1,000 a year in income, you're going to have to pay $400 tax, say. So you're going to end up with $600. But if you manage to lower your living expenses per year by $1,000, you're $25,000 closer to early retirement, because that's $25,000 that you don't need to save to be able to create that 4% passive income to get the $1,000 to cover that annual expenses. So I think the small amounts really matter, and to focus on creating a low-cost, happy lifestyle rather than chasing more money to compensate for higher spending.
Probably no, I mean, the mathematics is simple. We've seen it all before. Even these investing questions about LICs versus ETFs, I mean, who cares? Like seriously, if whatever you're most comfortable with, like as long as you don't make, you know, a total disastrous mistake. If you get 80% of it right, then you'll probably be fine. But investing and FIRE is all about psychology. And I think it's probably 98% psychology, 2% whether you put it in Vanguard or LICs. So know your why, get the psychology right, become comfortable with the volatility of the share market. If you invest early, invest slowly, you naturally become comfortable with share market movements. And if you know why you're doing it, then over the next decade, 2 decades, then it's easier when you have that goal in mind.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Knowing your why, getting started, and then fine-tuning the small expenses. So I just cap what they say.
Yeah, you know, I think that as a participant and now a student of the FIRE community, I think the most important thing is to really ask yourself, what do you value, you know? And this is going to sound contrarian, but I don't think that FI is necessarily the answer to that question. You can go through your life and not be financially independent and still have a very values-based lifestyle. It may be that driving a BMW is really important to you. And if that's what's really important to you, then get a BMW, you know? The other thing that I've noticed from a lot of people who've reached FI is that, and there's a weird red herring kind of thing about it, which is that, I don't know if this is your experience or not, I'd be very curious to know, but you work for 10, you scrap and screw for 10 years to get to this magical point, and then there's no real magic to it. In a weird way, it's like one of those Matrix or Star Wars movies, you know, like the power is within you, despite the fact that you got there, if that makes sense. Is your experience that?
I was actually one of those people who was completely convinced I was going to retire and do absolutely nothing forever. I thought that was realistic. I thought I was going to be completely happy doing nothing, but it just doesn't work out like that. After a couple of months, you kind of unwind from the daily grind, I guess, and then you feel really energized and you actually want to work even though you don't have to. It's really bizarre. I'm the last person who would have believed that statement, but it's true. So it kind of works in the opposite way, that when you can afford to sit around and do nothing is exactly when you stop feeling the urge to sit around and do nothing.
But so the point is that the goal is to put your money in service to what you value. That's the goal. It's not about buying shares or whatever like that. It's directing your money consciously.
It's a tough one to follow, Travis.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just say simply what I've done well and what I think is worked best for me, and that's starting really early and really focusing on not letting my lifestyle creep. I see that happen a lot, and the lifestyle creep I think is a killer for most people who start a job, graduate uni, they've been living really frugally at university, and then they're like, okay, cool, now I got my paycheck. Now I'm going to move out and get my own place. And then after that, it's kind of a cascading thing. I've seen that with friends and then seen a slight reversion there. But yeah, it's fun.
I'll just add one more thing. Question everything. You might think that you need 2 cars because you've got 2 people in your family and a bunch of kids, but there are so many people out there who get away with just 1 car and hire a car when they need it, or no car. There's lots of things that people go, oh, I finished school, need to go to uni, need to buy a house, need to buy a car, need to do this, need to do that. So just question everything, and is that really what you want?
Become an independent thinker, really, isn't it?
Hi. Sorry, is that alright to ask now?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, good. I was just wondering if franking credits get abolished, would you guys change your strategy of investing in index other than an index fund?
Depends. It's very unlikely they would just, you mean franking credit refunds or franking credits altogether? Because the issue last year was, was about franking credit refunds being scrapped. So I was not planning to change my strategy at all if franking credit refunds were scrapped, because even if those refunds weren't coming in, you're still getting a 4% dividend yield, is still tax effective, so you still have the tax credit, it just won't be refunded to you. So it's still, that 4% income is still tax protected in a way. But if franking credits were scrapped altogether, I think there would be either something else to compensate for that. So maybe lower company tax rates. So that's been kind of thrown around as an idea. And if that happens, company tax rates would go down, company earnings would go up, so the market would go up, and company dividends would go up. So there would be some sort of compensating mechanism at play. They wouldn't just take something away so drastically as franking credits entirely and not have some sort of compensation. But
If you just, for example, take a look at the US market, they don't have franking credits, and so companies change how they return to shareholders. Over there, they'll return more in terms of capital gains, which means that versus here, where we have, you've got, I think you'll know the averages better than me, but say a 1.5% dividend yield on average in the US market versus here it's sitting at 4%. And the reason for that is because we have this franking credit system in place which incentivises companies to be able to pay back to investors the dividend form of income. And if you look at 2 markets, the total return is pretty similar over time between AU versus US, etc.
And you'd probably find that if something like that happened, the market would fall quite a lot if there was no sort of adjustments made elsewhere. So if that happened, guess what happens? You're now not buying at a 4% dividend, maybe you're buying at a 5 or 6% dividend. So it kind of changes the maths on that as well. So that's something else to consider.
So what Dave's mentioning there is the efficient market hypothesis, and that is just basically that all of the factors are priced into the market. So currently it's dividend franking credit is priced into the market by all of the players in the market, all of the investors, all of the professional managed fund investors. And so if the franking credit was immediately removed, then all of those investors would compare the returns they can get on the Australian market with the returns they can get on other assets like property, with international share markets, and automatically they'll take money out of the Australian market because they're now losing that 1.7%. and the market will balance itself out. So it really is a red herring. It actually doesn't matter.
So it would move to a lower valuation and a higher yield and future higher returns from that lower valuation. So it's hard to say what would happen, but if it happened completely as you're saying, like franking credit scrapped, I would consider looking at other options, but it would depend what the market reaction to that was and how drastic it was, and if there was any sort of other mechanisms that were changed to compensate. So it's kind of a complex topic, but I think it's extremely unlikely considering they couldn't even get the refund scrapped. And that probably won't come up at the next election, so it's probably another 8 years before it's even considered. So I think we don't have to think about it for too long.
Not entirely your question, but I think if drastic changes do happen, the people who are informed and who know things and who look at things and can have a little bit of a buffer, you'll have more opportunities as well, and you'll be able to pivot and you'll be able to change your strategy if you need to, if changes happen. So it's just about being prepared and having a look at what the options are for you.
But if that sort of thing was to worry you, then definitely have more money invested in overseas share markets. I mean, there's no use having your money invested here just because you think it's a good idea, but then in the back of your mind, you're worried about something happening, so you kind of have to make that decision as well.
What's your thoughts on the negative
Oh, I so wanted to write a blog post on this, but I was worried I would absolutely get, what's the term? I think it's such an emotive topic in Australia right now, and it was made even more emotive by how it played out in the last federal election. So I know Dave's a property investor, I'm a property investor. I'm proud to be a property investor. I'm proud that my residential properties provide safe housing for people. And I know I have to say that because whenever I tell people I invest in property, they think I'm like killing babies or something, like, how dare you get some, advantages for negative gearing. And in my case, actually, our portfolio is fairly close to being positively geared. In fact, when we do our tax over this month, I'll learn if it is, and I'm pretty sure if it is. This is a very loaded question, and there's a lot of aspects to this. I think my personal view is that had the federal election gone differently and had we had negative gearing in, that it would not have solved the affordability crisis for a number of reasons. I think either investors would have chosen not to go into the market, or the market, particularly in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne, were already going down, so it wouldn't have benefited it. Or a lot of investors would have chosen other options that would have given them a higher yield, such as Airbnb. So the net result would not have delivered a benefit to making housing more affordable. The issue with affordable housing is very complex. There is no easy solution. There is not enough social housing, which doesn't help for one thing. There needs to be a lot more innovative schemes that provide, I believe, perhaps direct subsidies to those looking to either rent or buy, to give more choice and competition in the market. So it's a very short snapshot, but I really didn't like the proposal that was there. And then there was this also, as part of that scheme too, they were going to give more money for institutional investors and developers to build more affordable housing, which to me just, sang out buying big rabbit warrens that possibly no one was going to buy either. So I had a lot of huge concerns about that. And that's probably all I'll say, because it's such a hugely contentious issue that, I try to go generally in my writing very low key on negative gearing because people get so upset about it.
So are you asking about it as from an investment standpoint or from a tax legislation standpoint?
I guess both. I have negative geared papers, and if I should be paying out certain things positively geared, or should I be investing my money somewhere else?
Well, I guess it depends. If you plan on keeping, that's not advice, obviously. Maybe a big disclaimer on the wall. When you're paying off a property, I guess, or paying off a loan, your return is equivalent to the interest rate on the loan. So at the moment, it's kind of low, like 3.5%. So if you were planning to keep that property forever, say, and then use it as rental income, then yeah, I will probably pay it off. But if not, if you're planning to sell it later or do something else, I would probably invest my money elsewhere. But as a piece of tax legislation, I don't really have strong feelings either way about it. I mean, if it was taken away, investors would demand higher rental yields to compensate for not getting, not being able to claim tax losses. So, yeah, I don't think, I don't have too much to say.
Just to take this from a different standpoint, I just think it's very stressful to be invested in something which takes money out of your pocket on a weekly basis, and I'm just not interested in any sort of negative gearing strategy at all. So probably if you are considering that strategy and you think, oh, I'm going to make all this extra money, just consider that, again, the psychology of it and the staying the course, because it is, and I avoid debt because I just don't want to be in situations because you're kind of walking a tightrope, lose your job, you have this negative cash flow investment that's making you more money overall, but again, it puts you in a more fragile life position. You need your full-time income, you need other income to support that negative cash flow investment.
Yeah, I have the same feelings as Pat, where that's not something that I would choose just for that peace of mind of knowing my expenses can stay low and I don't have to worry about paying something off. Yeah, same.
If I started again, I probably wouldn't buy any property. I mean, if you're negative gearing, it's really just a bet on growth, on property prices continuing to grow. Although they've grown quite strongly over the last, say, few decades, I don't see the same sort of growth over the next couple of decades because our debt levels on a household basis have already gone up so much. Wages growth is pretty low. Mortgage rates can't go much lower, so there's not a lot of fuel that can be added to pump up growth going forward. So I'd probably only see like wages growth type price growth going forward. So it's not a great trade-off right now, I don't think.
I think I'm a little bit lazy as well. I don't want to deal with tenants or any of those problems.
It is extra hassles, yeah.
Most of the discussion tonight has been around regularly investing in the index or LICs or whatever, say on a quarterly basis or whatever. In my situation, I've come towards the end of my working life with some significant capital. Would it be the same idea that would be a good idea at my stage in life, do you think, compared to a regular investor? To use index funds as a good vehicle?
As a vehicle, I'd say yes. But do you mean should you regularly invest or invest it all at once?
All at once.
The math says you should do it all at once because the market goes up over time, but that's only an average. There is times when you would be better off doing it on a monthly basis, and most people, myself included, are more comfortable investing on a monthly basis if we have a large lump to invest, because you don't want to put all your money in now and then the market goes down. It's not about being upset that the market went down, it's that you'll have that sense of regret that you missed out on buying at lower prices. So I think if you wanted to do like monthly purchases until that capital was all invested, I think that makes complete sense, even though the math might say otherwise. I also think you could do a combination of the two, put in maybe half of it or a third of it, and then dollar cost average the rest each month or each quarter. I think that makes sense too.
Yeah, I'll just reinforce what Dave said. The maths is like you're 66% on top when you invest in a lump sum, but I think, as we've discussed, it's all a psychology game, and I wouldn't feel so confident investing in a lump sum when I'm towards the end of my working career and it's something I'm going to live off that money. That's not a gamble I want to take.
Yeah, I think a good comparison is how we all buy insurances. So we buy car insurance, we buy health insurance. Now, statistically speaking, the actuaries that the insurance companies buy know that they're going to win on those bets. Yet we still buy insurances. Dollar cost averaging is kind of the same thing. statistically you're going to lose by dollar cost averaging. However, that could be worth it for you because you want to buy a little insurance in case the market drops suddenly. So personally, with a large amount of cash to invest all at once, just from a psychological standpoint, I would do it a little bit over time because basically I'm selling off a few percentage points of statistical gain just to buy the insurance due to the volatility in the market.
And also, the Trinity study was done with the Trinity study, which is where the 4% rule came from. Are you aware of what I'm talking about? With regard to, yeah. So that was a 50-50 portfolio, right? 50% stocks. And there's a lot of young people on the stage here who have many decades of growth to look forward to. But you have to ask yourself, how much growth do you need or want given the likelihood of your longevity, which is not a very happy thought, but it's worth thinking about.
So I'm pretty new to FIRE, because I'm quite young. One thing that I guess I'm sort of concerned about is in the future with things like automation and AI and all that kind of stuff. If there is a point where I have retired for a while, and I happen to be in a situation where I need more money, on a monthly basis and whatnot, and say I know you're supposed to have a cash buffer as well, but worst case scenario, if that doesn't fall through, what would your plan be in that case? Because I think getting a job if you've been retired for a while is kind of hard due to experience and all that kind of stuff. So do you have any thoughts around that?
I'd say being young gives you an advantage as well to learn a new skill, retrain, whatever the new automation is. There's going to be people who need to build the automation, unless the robots build the robots. But there's always going to be needs.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's
I think in my lifetime anyway, I'm probably not that much older than you, that there'll still be need for humans and there'll still be a need for things to be done. Start your own business, find a niche market, clean the robots, I don't know, whatever. There'll be something to do. I don't think you'll ever be out of work.
If I may, I have a few friends who are sort of at that stage where they are actively looking now about, within the next 5 to 10 years, that they may not need to work, but they're actually thinking of options of still working part-time so that they still have that employment record, so that if something doesn't go to plan, that they have that option of jumping in. So, we're obviously talking here, we've seen a documentary about a very definitive, completely stop work, but there are a lot of options for graduated work too. And there's also options too for, after you stop a formal paid job for doing volunteer or other work that gives you new skill sets. And, with this coming disruption with the fourth industrial revolution, I think all of us need to be agile in terms of learning new skills. And sometimes workplaces are not the best places to actually equip us with those. I'm always amazed when I sit at my desk how my colleagues are blissfully unaware of all these changes that are happening, we've got 10 years from now anyway, if that helps.
Now, I think I actually work in HR, so I hire people all the time. It's often about the networks and connections and people you know as well, much more than your skill set, unfortunately. So, if you've got lots of time on your hands, build some networks as well, work on that.
It doesn't, this FI stuff doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can just choose to go semi-FI. So just choose to say maybe half as much, and the other half you can cover with part-time employment, and especially if you're concerned about having a gap maybe in your resume or something like that. I think that can be pretty powerful and still give you almost as much freedom as full FI, because even if you go full FI, most people end up doing something anyway. So if it was something you're concerned about, you could look at what you're going to transition to towards the end, or even earlier, and get there that way.
And other places in which all files that people were doing and enjoying what was the great value
Yes, those things are important, but I don't think it's that simple. I mean, human beings need meaning, you know, and for the most part, we find meaning through contribution, which sometimes means working, right? So I would say, and I know Pete pretty well, and he doesn't just go on his bike and get vegetables. He does quite a lot more than that. Yeah. And I think you and I, Dave, we were talking about this earlier, like, you know, those first few months of Fire, like, what's it like? Well, there's this unwinding process that happens, and you do your vegetables, and you're cooking, and you have friends over, and things like that. But then a day does come where you wake up, and you're like, geez, now what, you know? And all of the people that I've met who have retired early are big contributors. In fact, going back to this gentleman's question about why I made the documentary, when I went to the Chautauqua in Ecuador with all of these bloggers, before I went, I was looking at the agenda and I thought, this is kind of weird, like a bunch of white people like flying down to Ecuador to talk about getting rich, right? Like, what is that all about? That's kind of bougie and kind of weird, you know? But on the schedule was a day of service, a day of community service dedicated to the local community. And that's when I thought, okay, these people are up to something different than just getting rich, you know, and it is about contribution.
So Dave, what happened to you? You said you were bored after a couple of months. Are you back to full-time work? Or?
No full-time work. After, actually, before I retired, I was talking to some friends at work, and I was saying, I was sort of sharing and trying to drag them into this type of stuff. They said, oh, you should write this stuff down, maybe write a book or something. I was like, look, I don't know about writing a book, it seems a bit official and a bit serious. So I thought, and one mate convinced me, just write it down, and maybe you use it later. And I thought, I can't have to write it down. So I wrote down a bunch of notes, and then I was kind of looking at this notebook after being retired for a few months, and I thought, maybe I'll start a blog. So I started a blog and started to write sort of each week, and then I was compiling the notes and going through it, and then I really enjoyed the process of writing, so I enjoy spending a couple of days a week doing that now, and responding to my readers, like emails and comments and stuff, and getting feedback and new ideas for more stuff to write about, and just hearing that it's been helpful or that it's been interesting and was a different perspective to what they'd heard, or just feeling that people have got a use from something that you've created it's really good.
So similar to what Travis said, contribution, helping people out.
Yeah.
Travis, I wanted to ask you about the perfectly flawed couple that you actually found that were fantastic, and the content was fantastic in the documentary. It was obviously based around the couple and their long journey. Like, how difficult was it to actually find them? Because they were perfect and they were extremely eloquent and honest in the long journey as well.
Yeah, well, I got very, very lucky. I actually started the documentary about 4 years ago, and I started putting together the whole idea. But what I lacked was a central driver for the narrative, and I knew that I needed something like Scott and Taylor in order to make the film work. Otherwise, it would just be like a talking head piece, you know. And I kind of got waylaid. I have a day job, and I got waylaid, and I got sort of sidetracked for many months. And then I heard Scott on the Choose FI podcast, and he had just begun his journey. And I thought, oh no, this guy's doing my movie. This is terrible, you know. And then I thought, no, wait, this is perfect. Let me call him. And so I called him, and we had dinner, and I said, you know, and he needed a director because he didn't, you know, putting yourself in a movie is a hard thing. And it was just like a match made in heaven. And it was like the answer that I had been sort of praying for in terms of the narrative.
How long since filming that? Where are they now?
Yeah, so we stopped filming in last October. So it's been about 6-7 months of post-production editing. And they are still living in Bend, Oregon, and basically doing the same thing that you just saw them doing. You know, Scott's trying to get his business going. It's been a hard thing because he was in Southern California, where it's a little easier to have a video production company than it is in Bend. But he's trying to sort of like make do something with the film and continue this sort of like journey in terms of getting the information out to other people.
Will you make part 2?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe in 10 years, yeah. Like, I don't know what the part 2 would actually be, you know, unless, you know, yeah, probably not.
I think that's quite a good idea. When I listen to your young people, I'm just thinking that saving money shouldn't be the goal. It may be something we'll achieve, but you have to live in between. You are not living, waiting for that time when you really have it or when you have to stop working. So it might be a good idea to see in 10 years a reflection of how this changed their life before they got there. I think that's very
Yes,
important.
it could be. I mean, that's all dependent on like how it changes life too, you know. But yeah, yeah.
And thinking of living every day, or you know, trying to, and not only living for something in the future.
No, I agree with you. You look a bit concerned that you said the wrong thing. It's absolutely the right thing, I think. And like, I personally am not doing anything hardcore, I don't think. I'm designing my life that I'm happy with to live now, that will have that longevity, that I'll be able to live for a long period of time. So I'm not doing the hardcore work for 5 years and then retire on 300,000 the way ERA does it. So for me, it's more about the balance, which is the whole idea of my blog, and the journey and having that. So I think you're right. It's not all about not living today to have something great in 10 years' time. I'd probably give up, to be honest with you. So it's about building something now that I can have long term.
I definitely agree with that. In fact, in my book, I talk about this Buddhist concept about how the future literally doesn't exist. Like, it literally doesn't. Like, all we have is our here and now. Our past, if we go back in our brains a bit, but really, like, the future never gets there. And I guess, like I said before, you know, I had this experience in my first marriage where we were desperately always saving money to buy investment properties, but I wasn't really quite sure what the goal was. We didn't have money to have a lot of experiences. I mean, we did okay, but it wasn't fantastic. And so now I've really changed my thinking about this. And, you know, with my husband and I, he had a massive heart attack 18 months ago and I nearly lost him. And so in his family culture, going on cruise ships is a big thing for him, for instance. So we lashed out and went on a cruise ship for our honeymoon. We had 13 people on board, not just him, but his twin sister, her husband, his parents, my children, my best friend, her husband, and another family member of hers. So, you know, I guess going on a cruise ship doesn't quite fit up there in the fire, you know. If I looked at that and how much, and it wasn't horrifically expensive, we bought in advance and you got a good deal. I mean, it doesn't fit
Coupons.
Sorry?
You used coupons.
No, I didn't use coupons. I had a mother-in-law who researched a fantastic deal and locked it in like over a year in advance, so we didn't even need to use coupons for this one. But you know, if I was looking at, you know, the pure fire things, like this, that doesn't, going on a cruise ship does not fit into any of those things. But it was a really important time for us. It was our honeymoon and it was a family event, and you know, I nearly lost my now husband, and so what am I going to do? Wait 10 years to see if he's still alive in 10 years before we go on a cruise ship? So it's always a balance, I think, between these life experiences, between what's important for you and how you deal with those things.
So in the documentary, a lot of people retired or are projected to retire at a very young age, like 35 or even 25. It's almost like kind of like a competition who can retire the earliest. Do you know, or are there any people who kind of started the journey in the 30s or 40s, and what their experience are like?
Well, I started my journey in the 40s. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's very similar. I mean, you know, the trouble with starting every 10 years that you wait to start your journey, you have to save twice as much money, right? Because your money doubles in the market every 10 years, basically, give or take. So I started saving for retirement when I was 40, which means that I had to save what's the math, guys? Like, you know, 4 times as much money. So luckily I started saving when I was also entering the height of my career, and I kept my expenses extremely low. So that allowed me to make up for a lot of the gap. But if you start younger, you're off, you know, you have to save half as much, you know, so it's, does that help? Yeah, okay.
I think it can be easier when you're younger for a couple of reasons. As you grow older, you sort of have these ingrained habits and ingrained values that you grow really attached to your postcode, or you grow really attached to the nice car that you have. Like you see them struggling to switch down to a cheaper car because you grow attached to it, you grow accustomed to it over time. So I think in some ways it's easier when you're younger, before you have those built-in habits. But I think as the movement grows and as more people come into it, there will be more examples of people of all ages and all diversities to look at as an example of that it's possible for basically everyone.
Sorry if I may once again. So, you know, in my case, I'm rebuilding, so having gone through divorce and lost quite a lot. And I met my husband, Neil, 2 years ago, so we started dating early August 2 years ago. And when I first met Neil, he had credit card debt and he was living with mum and dad, so, you know, it didn't really sound like a good fire candidate, but actually we have the similar frugal values. But I said to him, you watch and see. In a year, things will change. In 2 years, things will change. And in 5 years, things will change. So we're 2 years in, and by the end of the first year, I think we had the credit card paid off, and we had some investment properties, and that was good. By the end of the second year, we radically reduced the mortgage. I mean, it wasn't a big mortgage anyway, but it's really half over the last year. And now we're tracking to see how we can turn it around. So I sort of think a 5-year plan is kind of a good kind of thing, because you start to see things, but you don't necessarily see it in the first year. You don't necessarily see it in the second year as much, but you really do start to see it after that.
Do you have plans of putting this on Netflix? The reason I'm asking is I think the concept is really great, and coming from a developing country, I want to share this content to, let's say, 4 countries in Asia. So, yeah.
Yes, we intend to go far and wide. Yeah, I mean, Netflix may not be the right place, to be honest with you. I don't know how much you pay attention to the way the streaming wars are sort of unfolding, but Disney is poised to totally pummel Netflix at this point. HBO Max is coming online. There's a lot of new streaming things. You know, we'll definitely be looking for a streaming provider for distribution. To be honest, Netflix is really cruel to independent filmmakers. They don't pay very much money, and we have to pay our investors back. They would probably pay us less than a third of what the film costs to put it on there. They're in 190 countries, and that would be a deal that's one and done. We would be done. That would be the end of it. So it's not the best business model, actually.
And methods.
Yeah, but we're going to be going to iTunes and Vimeo and stuff like that within the next couple